Oh, I think we have about 50 people right now on the call. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. We're grateful to have you here with us today and have the opportunity to share the impact of our Digital Navigator pilot program. We have a lot to share, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Liz, if we can go to the next slide. I want to walk people through our agenda. So I'll start by providing a quick overview of our work, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague Shalane, who will share an overview of how this pilot was born, and then share details about our consortium model. And then we will give the floor to Liz Moore with Applied Inference, our evaluator for this project, who will walk us through the evaluation findings. We also want to make sure that this meeting is interactive, so feel free to ask questions along the way. And if we go to the next slide. Oops. There. Thank you, Liz. My name is Marisol Tapia-Hopper, and I serve as the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Funding at the Workforce Development Council of Seattle-King County, known as the WDC. We are one of 12 local workforce boards in Washington State. And as the backbone workforce organization for the region, we are taking proactive steps to address systemic disparities in workforce outcomes. And our goal is to cultivate an innovative, community-focused, results-oriented network that is deeply rooted in the principles of racial equity. And to achieve this work, we collaborate with over 40 community partners, creating a model for effective collaboration and non-duplication of services. And by aligning, our resources and the expertise under this shared commitment, we aim to not only address the widespread issues of income inequality, but also the lack of opportunities that the current workforce system fails to tackle effectively. And also, as a workforce board, we are leveraging our influence, to pioneer targeted initiatives like our digital equity work, but also our work center on economic mobility, including our initiative center around guaranteed basic income, which I invite you to learn more about through our website and the report that we released last month. And if we go to the next slide. The WTC sees digital skills as the connective tissue to economic mobility. And in today's world, both businesses and workers are making greater use of technology, making digital skills fundamental to success in the workforce. Yet, according to research from our partners at the National Skills Coalition, 1/3 of U.S. workers lack vital digital skills, and 92% of jobs require digital skills. This has pronounced implications for low-income workers, including workers of color who are overrepresented in industries prone to automation. And since launching the Digital Navigator pilot, we have been able to deepen this commitment to this crucial work thanks to our partnership, not only with the Department of Commerce, but also in our partnership with Comcast. And their support has enabled us to bring digital navigators to our workforce locations. And we are excited that work continues to be supported and expanded. And with this background, I want to pass it to my colleague Shalane for her to share an overview of how this pilot was born and give a shout out to all of the people that were part of this initiative. And then we will give the floor to Liz after that. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. So I'm Shalane Aldridge, and I am a project manager at the WDC. I oversee our work source system, and I've also been engaged in our digital navigation work with Marisol and others at our organization. So in terms of background, the pandemic really was a catalyst for us when it comes to digital navigation and other efforts that we engage in at the WDC. It really emphasized the racial and income disparities in digital equity and access, and low-income communities were among the most affected. We saw some grassroots efforts emerge across the region, but funding was sporadic and our region lacked formal coordination. The other thing we noticed is that while some of these small grants were issued, City of Seattle and others, King County, we heard feedback from the community that sometimes they were hard to access or the application processes were really cumbersome. Also, the number of awards was not as high as the need. So the need definitely outpaced that. So around this time, the WDC formed partnerships with key leaders in the region, which included King County IT, City of Seattle IT, some of our library partners as well. And we really began to informally discuss what we envisioned as a coordinated but community-based approach to bridge the digital divide. Next slide. So the digital equity journey even started before early 2022 as we begin to just engage with community partners on a variety of things. But early 2022 was really when our meetings became formalized with those community partners, as we uh, just discussed. And the WDC put out a digital equity asset map as well during that time frame to begin to codify what some of those resources were, who was providing digital classes, who was distributing laptops, who had internet devices. So this was something that Marisol had spearheaded. And then after that, we begin to think about how digital skills or the lack of digital skills were really affecting job seekers and how are we embedding those into our workforce program. So in August 2022, a digital equity survey was sent out primarily in the King County region, but we also got a lot of input from other areas of the state too, just to understand what the needs were, what practitioners were seeing, and to see how people were engaging with those questions and assessing it with their customers as well. September 2022, we formalized a digital needs assessment tool within our local King County WIOA programs. And then December 2022, after a lot of this planning and discussion with our informal consortium partners, we really formalized that consortium. We submitted a grant to Commerce, which then launched that Digital Navigator program. And then in September 2023 is when that program sunsetted. Next slide. So what we learned from the WorkSource survey that went out to folks in this digital needs assessment was that only 14% of frontline staff were using a digital assessment tool or a set of questions to figure out what those digital needs were of customers. And we also saw that employers had industry specific digital skills that they needed workers to have in order to access those opportunities. And then lastly, we saw that access to devices and digital skills were at the top for two of the biggest barriers that job seekers were facing in order to get employment. So you can see all these things were really working together to show us how critical digital skills were. Next slide. So when we talk about the launch of the Digital Navigator program, it was really a collaborative approach where you had leaders understand that it wasn't about Seattle IT, it wasn't about King County IT, it was really about this large community need, and that we needed to come together and help push it forward. And within that, we listened to the community to understand that getting the money out to community organizations and having an RFQ process really had to be something that was easy, and that we wanted to put together a lot of different elements to it so that all of the organizations were very well supported. So key partnerships, again, covered that, but the intent really of the program was to amplify access to affordable internet, increase digital skills, and to use a digital navigator model, which is that one-on-one support in order to help people move forward and be successful. And then the funding came from Department of Commerce, just under $1 million. And then we also braided WIOA funding as well to really bump that up and to engage some of our WIOA partners as well. Then lastly, and Applied Inference, which is Liz, she conducted in-depth program evaluations to get at what were some of those best practices, what were the impacts. And we did this in multiple ways. So the WDC did collect information from all the service providers on the number that was served. And then beyond that, Applied Inference had surveys pre and post, as well as focus groups and interviews with a lot of people that were engaged in the program to really get that comprehensive look at all of the impacts. Next slide. And here, I just want to show you, one thing I'm very proud of in this work is the number of people that came together collaboratively in order to meet that community need. It's huge. So here are the 12 community-based organizations that provided services to our communities. And then we have Interconnection, who provided the digital devices. And then on the left side here, we have some of our consortium partners, those that came together with us to help lead the grant application to Commerce and helped us to build that out and design what a program would successfully look like, embedding all the voices of the community and what we had learned thus far. And next slide. I will turn it over to Liz so she can tell you more about the evaluation aspect.
Okay, thank you, Shalane. So I'm Liz Moore, and I was the external evaluator for this project. Don't pay too much attention to this logic model. I just wanted to show it to you. This is what I followed to design the evaluation. But I just want to emphasize some of the things that Shalane said, that the 12 community partners were quite different from each other. They served different populations, and they had different kinds of staffing. They used different approaches to the digital skills training. And from an evaluation perspective, that's a really good thing because it gives a chance to look at how those different approaches work in different circumstances. So before we dive into the data, I want to just review what the goals of the evaluation were and give you a preview of the results. So the first goal was to conduct a needs assessment, which we defined as access to devices and the internet and the digital skills to use them. And I did this, it's sort of important to know that I did this at the organization level and then rolled it up to an overall report. So I provided individual reports for each of the 12 partners. And that was important because of one of the things Shalane said, the desire to strengthen these organizations so that they will be more competitive for funding opportunities to be able to continue the work. So the results of the needs assessment isn't going to be a surprise to anybody on this call. There's a huge unmet need for devices and for training. A lot of people just make do with their smartphones, which is tough when I think about those high school kids writing their term papers. There was a big effect of income on access to devices and a big effect of English fluency on digital skills and on access to training. But overall, people really wanted access to technology and the skills to use it because they see that it's needed to improve their circumstances and just to catch up. So the second goal was to conduct an outcome evaluation. How did all the effort people went into, how did that work out? And we found significant increases in access to technology, in all of the computer and internet skills that we looked at, and that still there just remains this substantial unmet need. The third goal was to assess the different approaches to skills training. And we found that people were really happy with any training, whether it was classes or one-time workshops or one-on-one engagement, as long as they had someone who could help them, some kind of a teacher. The material in the presentation was culturally relevant and it was delivered. It's really important that it be delivered with kindness and patience. There's something about technology that helps us become insecure, and that it's delivered in a language that the people understand. The one finding that one of the important findings is that independent self-study in English wasn't very effective for people who were just beginning with technology or people who didn't speak the language of the self-study program. The last goal was to just identify gaps and to collect recommendations. So one of the things we found was that digital navigators and customers weren't aware of existing trustworthy sources for devices and training. And many people, especially people with limited English proficiency, were just afraid they can't learn. Some learners want to teach, which I thought might provide a basis for a community-based volunteer corps of teachers. And it seems that teaching material and an inventory of resources are really needed to support trainers, especially people who are new and people who are don't have any option other than self-study. And it's really important that that material be translated into all the needed languages. So I also wanted to just go over some of the things people said. I asked, what difference has this made in your life to have access to these things? And my favorite response was somebody who sort of spoke for everyone. It was, of course, it made a difference. I can use a computer now. And but there were also different categories. So I coded responses into personal life, education for themselves and their kids, community life, and work life. So people talked about, their increased confidence. They talked about being better able just to manage their lives. People were able to access immigration papers online. And some people talked about, receiving official letters that scared them. But if they were in English and they didn't speak English, it created a problem. So instead of waiting till the next time they're going to see their case managers, they could just take a picture. They learned how to take a picture of that and send it on to their case managers. So this helped a lot with anxiety and stress. Some people talked about the importance of, they now know how to organize their files and keep track of their passwords. And another thing that I think is really important is that technology, the increased accessibility that technology provides is super important for people with disabilities. And some people, have even said that with technology, functionally, I no longer have a disability. So I think that's really an important population to keep in mind. For education, it's just what you would think, with technology, people actually have access to education and they can help their kids. And there were a number of people who said that this technology actually helped them improve their English. So in terms of community life, many people indicated that this technology helped strengthen their communication, and that included with people back home in their home countries as well as their local community. So it also strengthened this process, strengthened their local community, and it made it so that people could catch up and they felt like they could just participate as residents, just participate more fully. People learned how to use translation apps, which helped them get out of their neighborhoods. One person, I just wrote down this quote, he said, "It opened the world to me." And some people literally learned how to use the navigation apps like maps so they could physically get around in their environment. And of course, there's a huge impact on work life. People learned how to do, or were able, if they already knew, they were able to search for jobs and apply for jobs online. And then, this really shouldn't be the last thing, but they learned how, some people learned, or they definitely wanted to learn the skills to be able to perform those jobs. Okay. Oh, you know what? I was going to stop there to see if, does anybody, we're about ready to jump into the actual data now. Does anybody have anything they want to say or any questions before we go to the next step? Okay, let's go. So Shalane mentioned that we had mixed methods. There were about 3,000, a little more than 3,000 people served in this project. So I had access to the intake form that the WDC put together with almost 2,000 people. We did pre and post surveys in 8 languages. And just as an aside, it was only all of the languages were used, or almost all of them, I think, but the most use is made of the English and Spanish language versions. And I think that it may have been just a little bit too much to ask of people who were beginners to complete an online survey. So live and learn. So we also did focus groups that provided a lot of information, many different languages, both in person and online. I did interviews with a bunch of digital navigators and their managers, and I got access to the final reports that partners submitted. So just a brief overview of who participated. Of these 3,000 people, nearly all were BIPOC. The majority were women. They had a broad age range, but the average was 41 years. Half of the people were unemployed, but looking for work, and about a quarter were working. Most indicated that they had low income. Nearly all indicated they had low income. More than half had a language barrier. There were seniors, people in unstable housing, and people who were justice involved. So that intake form asked people what language they speak at home, and people indicated 30 different languages. The most common language was English, but that was only about 1/3 of the participants. The subset who completed pre and post surveys spoke 14 languages, 14 different languages at home. Classes were offered in 8 different languages, and people could receive an introduction, a one-on-one introduction in 3 other languages. So there were classes for most of the people, in language classes for most of the participants, but not everybody could access them because they didn't know about what was being offered in other organizations. So in educations, 60%, more than half of the English-only speakers had attended at least some college, compared to 21% of the speakers of other languages. This was important because limited education turned out to be a barrier to having digital skills. And I think, importantly, English speakers were more likely to report having a language issue, having a learning issue, like a learning disability, or maybe they had an IEP back in school. Or some people said that they knew they had a focus problem or an attention problem. And not as many people who were speakers of other languages indicated a learning issue, but probably they were as prevalent in that group, just unrecognized. However, those other folks were much more likely to indicate a circumstantial issue, like they didn't have education where they were growing up, or some people just said they were afraid they can't do it, or some people said they had a memory problem, maybe because of age or because of trauma. So one of the things I learned from that is that the most successful teachers were the ones who were sort of focused on what they called emotional literacy as they taught, and who were aware of cultural relevancy of the material and the teaching methods. Okay, so this is kind of a hairy table, but it provides a lot of information about the needs assessment. And I want to make sure you know how to look at it. So first of all, there were a little over 1,600 people who provided enough data to contribute to this table. These were the measures that we looked at to assess technology access. So it's whether it's having a working home computer, and then different components of internet access. Some that really stood out to me were the people whose cell phone is their only form of internet access, home internet access, and people who didn't have any home internet access. So this column here is the people who speak only English at home, and that was about a third of the participants. And this column is for people who speak other languages at home, 2/3. This row is for people who checked the low income box on the intake form, and this row is for people who didn't check that box. So let's look first at the overall. So overall, combining across language and across income, 25% of the people who responded to the intake survey had a working computer at home. And just to give you some context, that compares to 97% of King County residents overall. And that's a little bit of an old figure, so it may be even higher than that now. Let me see. And so we had almost 30% of the people in this sample use cell phones as their only access to internet at home. Half of the people have a paid plan, and 20% didn't have any home internet access. So this is looking at the marginals, the biggest marginals. So now let's look at some of the other marginals. Are these results the same for people who only speak English at home versus people who speak other languages? So the comparison here is from side to side, and this figure shows that the people who speak only English at home were a little more than twice as likely as speakers of other languages to have a home computer. And they were more likely also to use a cell phone as their only data source. And then, you can work your way through some of these others. So now let's ask the same question, is it the same by income? So that comparison, and again, this is going to be combining, regardless of language. So this comparison shows that people who didn't check the low income box, that I'm calling higher income, were almost 3 times as likely as the people who did check the lower income box to have a working computer at home. And they were a little less than twice as likely to have a paid internet plan. Okay. Now, the next question that comes up, and this is where we get into these intersections, is whether that income effect is the same for both language groups, or we could say whether language is the same for both income groups. But to do that, we'll make this comparison. So this shows that for people who speak only English at home, again, the people who have higher income are more than twice as likely, are between 2 and 3 times as likely to have a home computer. But when we move over to people who speak other languages at home, that gap increases to 3 times as likely. And I think one of the most interesting findings in this table is that among the people who speak only English at home, low-income people were 10 times as likely to rely on their cell data for their home internet access. In the homes where other languages are spoken, the people with low income are still more likely than their higher income counterparts to rely only on their cell data, but they were only like 2.5 times as likely. So that makes me think that these English only speakers know something. Okay, now I didn't talk about the ACP figures in the previous slide because it's a little complicated. This figure here shows that only 256 people, or 16%, were already enrolled in ACP when they began this program. And the digital navigators did a great job with providing outreach, but it wasn't necessarily personal. They would post things or mention something in a class. And only 279 people were actually helped with their ACP application, which is surprising because this is a good program. Why the gap? Well, one reason, digital navigators explained that the application is really time consuming and their participants needed help. So they just didn't have the time to help everybody. So they didn't promote them heavily. Another reason was that application process, sometimes it worked and sometimes people got stuck in the middle of it and they didn't know why. participants often didn't understand the program, or they just weren't aware of it. A lot of people preferred using the hotspot that was provided at their child's school, even if that meant that they wouldn't have internet access in the summer. And some digital navigators didn't understand the program. Some thought that documentation would be required, or that the participants needed to be receiving other benefits, or that they needed a school-age child. If there was a language barrier, either on the part of the digital navigator or on the part of the participant, that made it even harder to understand. Participants explained that if they were unemployed, it was still too expensive, even though there was a good discount. And some had unstable housing, so they didn't have any place to put their router. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. Oh, is there something?
Liz, there's just one question from
Yes.
David here in the chat. So can you recap what was the identifier of low income or higher income question mark? Was it just a box that said low income?
That's right. It was just a box. People checked it or didn't check it.
And then Liz, I know we had talked about stopping at this point to ask for more questions.
Thank you.
Would
You're
you
right.
like to stop? Okay. We'll give it 1 minute just to let us know if you have questions, and then we'll spend what time we need to answer them. Please either put it in the chat or raise your hand if you have a question.
Stacy has a question.
Hi, thanks. So I had a clarifying question. So when it says percent paid plan, that means that the household is paying for internet service. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Thanks. And so I think I found that very interesting that actually the households with other languages actually were more likely to pay for an internet plan. And I was curious if you had any insights around why that is. Thanks.
I will send that question back to you. I'll tell you what my ideas were, but you all probably have more insight into it. My ideas were that the speakers of other languages have case managers who might be able to direct participants or their customers to like an internet essentials plan or something like that. And people who were English only speakers might be less likely to have case managers that could help in that way. What do you all think?
I am also thinking that some of them had internet access maybe through their school, maybe their children's school too. That's kind of something that comes to my mind.
Yeah, it is. It did strike me. Oh, the other thing I thought was that the English only household, you can save a lot of money if you're paying for a data plan anyway for your smartphone. You can get by with that, especially if you know how to use it as a hotspot, or if it allows you to use it as a hotspot. So it might be a way that people who sort of have learned the ins and outs of technology in this country already know how to do. And so it might be that people who are newcomers just might not know that yet.
Liz, there's a question from Doreen.
Go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of questions. I guess one of my theories might be why people would or wouldn't have a paid plan would be knowing how to find and use Wi-Fi, and it'd be interesting to ask that for a question. I always ask a question about how much people can ask about disabilities or use of specific accessibility features of different devices. And I don't even know how to ask a askable question in a project like this, but I'd be interested to know whether you were able to ask anything this time or whether that should be something to do for future evaluation.
One of the Friendship Circle of Washington serves young people with disabilities. And so I did get to hear some from them. And just as an aside, I also work with Do It at the University of Washington, the disabilities unit. So I've worked with them for a lot of years. And so I do have some information just because of that other work that sometimes informs this.
Great, thank you. That's probably as much as there's time for right now, because I want to hear other people's questions.
There's a question, a comment and a question from Suzanne in the chat stating that the original ACP application did seem to require some form of federally recognized documentation for low-income status, with a workaround for undocumented people who had a child receiving free lunch or some other income benefit at school. Is this no longer true?
Uh-oh, any experts here on the ACP? My information came from, I looked up the program and it said explicitly that there were no requirements for documentation. There are requirements for low income, but not for citizenship. Does anybody else have better information than that?
No, but we can flag that.
Okay. Should I go on?
Yep.
Okay. So this is just a jump ahead. I tried to organize this to have the outcome results come later, but since we're talking about technology access, I just wanted to give these results here. So, so there was, we did find significant increases in home computers, home internet access, and having enough technology at home for everyone. But, oops, sorry. I want to point out that, despite these increases, the level of access still remains problematic, because remember, it's that 97% figure is what is King County overall. And I also want to say that this subset, the subset that completed the pre and post surveys, were probably people who were a little more comfortable with computers. That's why they were able to do an online survey. Okay, so now let's go on to a needs assessment relative to the digital skills. So there are going to be a lot of figures that look kind of like this, and I want to give you an idea of how to read it. So the key is going to be up here in the legend. And in this case, the outside segment indicates the percentage of people who were very comfortable performing each of these tasks. And these were the tasks that were included on the WDC's intake form. The inside segment is the percentage that were not at all comfortable performing that task. And so overall, with this figure, you can see that participants were least comfortable with job-related tasks. So then the next question I asked was, what factors affect people's comfort performing these tasks? So the first one I looked at was income. And we can see there's not much of an impact of income. Participants with higher income, or who didn't check the low income box, were slightly more comfortable using a computer, email, and Zoom, and people with low income were a bit more comfortable with these job-related tasks. And that might have to do with the fact that some of the higher income participants were actually retirees, so they were no longer in the job market. So how about the language spoken at home? And the answer is a big yes. The people who speak, I forgot to say this. So again, looking at the legend, the top bar in this case is the people who speak only English at home. The bottom bar is the people who speak other languages at home. And this number is the average score, and the scores range from 1, which referred to not at all, up to 4, which is very comfortable. So that's the meaning of these numbers. So the people who spoke only English at home averaged at least somewhat comfortable on all of the tasks. Speakers of other language were, barely made it to slightly comfortable on all the tasks except for using a smartphone. So what about education? Does that affect comfort performing these tasks? And the answer is yes. So you can see that as education increases, so does comfort using the task or performing the tasks. What about having a working computer at home? And the answer is yes. People with a working computer at home were at least a half a point more comfortable with most of these skills. Okay, now we're coming to a hairy one. These factors all probably interact. So my question was, well, which are really the most important? So I did a multiple regression analysis, and before I sort of describe these results, I want to remind you that income was the most important factor in just having technology at home. But as far as being comfortable using that technology, the language spoken at home was the most powerful predictor for all of these tasks, followed by education. So once the language spoken at home did its predicting power, just a second here, then education came into the equation. And after those two came into the equation, having a working computer at home or low income didn't really account for much. But overall, this was a really powerful equation for predicting how comfortable people were. In social science, we often get excited if we can account for 15% of the variance in responses, and you can see these numbers here are much higher than that. So this was a powerful predictive equation. So this seems like it might be a good place to pause to see if there are any other questions.
One thing that I want to note, just for context, we see anywhere from 25 to 30%, depending on the source, of King County residents speaking a language other than English at home. And then when you think of the size of our county and region, it's over 600,000 individuals. So I think that's really important for us to consider when we're looking at some of the challenges for those that speak English as a second language, that it's a very large segment of our population, our workforce. And so I think these findings are really important for us to be able to address that effectively.
Okay.
There's one question in the chat. Was age a factor that you looked at?
I didn't look at it, but I think that's a really good, let me see, I didn't have the data. Did I? Yeah, I had their age range. Okay, no, I just didn't look at it. Yeah, I think that's really important.
And that was from Michelle at
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Good point. I wish I had looked at it. I just didn't think of it. Okay, so then the next figures are about what gets in the way of using computers and what people want to learn. So regardless of English fluency, the cost of computers was the barrier most often indicated, followed by fear of scams or fear of identity theft. There were some that were different for people depending on their level of comfort in English. So unsurprisingly, people who were not comfortable in English were more concerned that their limited English skills might be a barrier and that there weren't any classes in their language. They were also, though, I think it's important to be aware that people who were not comfortable in English were more likely to say they were afraid they couldn't learn or that they didn't have the opportunity to learn. Okay, so what do people want to learn? Again, there are some differences between people who have English fluency and people who have less English fluency. But the main difference is that the people with less English fluency were just less confident about what they wanted to learn. It is really important to note that they wanted to learn the same things. The same things came out on top in both cases. Specifically, digital safety was on top for both groups. Productivity software, things you need for your job, was on top for both, was second for both groups. And just how to use a computer and how to apply for a job online. So before I go on to the next figure, I want to make sure you understand something about this graph, just like the others. So looking down here at the legend, this outside segment tells the percentage of people who who want to learn more about this topic. The middle segment, the gray segment, is the percentage who feel like they already know. And the inside segment are people who just aren't sure, or they aren't ready, or they're not interested. So the thing that I want to point out is that this outside segment is not a measure of importance. It's just a measure of what people don't know yet. Together, these two segments, what people already know and what the rest of the population wants to learn, that's a measure of importance. So, of these top 6 things that people want to learn about, knowing how to use a computer was the most important for everybody. It's just that 56% already know. Okay. Now, what do respondents want to do with this technology? So for the most part, people wanted to use it to improve their circumstances. People who are less comfortable with English were more likely to say that they weren't more likely than people who were more fluent in English. They wanted to use it to manage their lives better, or to catch up with society, to become part of society. So that one of the people who were serving those youth with disabilities said, we saw participants with special needs get excited about initiating communication with others through email and understanding home functionality like grocery shopping. These skills help our participants thrive in new and different ways. The outcome for me is having individuals with special needs gain social skills for communication. So how did the DNP, the Digital Navigator program, address these needs? Well, there were the 12 partner organizations plus interconnections, and these were the partner organizations. They distributed 600 laptops, plus World Relief had another 200 laptops that they had separately. And they distributed 250 hotspots, but still the demand is way beyond the supply. The Digital Navigators provided digital skills training for more than 2,400 people. And how that was done was based on the needs of their customers and the capacity of their customers and the staffing that was available. So people loved being able to take classes. There's 7 organizations offered classes, and this was most effective for people who could, whose schedules would allow them to attend classes at that time, and they were stable enough to attend classes more than once a week, or more than 1 week. Workshops were really positive, especially for people who didn't have the stability to return to classes, or they had just specialized needs. One-on-one engagement was really great for people who had difficulty learning in a group, or they had idiosyncratic learning needs. And I'll say that all of the organizations provided one-on-one training, but it was the primary training for 2 of the organizations. And some organizations relied on self-study, and that was really what these groups were kind of pushed into, just by their circumstances. At Uplift Northwest, they just had way too many people to know how to distribute the laptops and to bring people into classes. So they tried self-study and realized that it wasn't working very well for their people who were new to computers. And so they started using workshops towards the end of the program. And the Digital Navigator from World Relief was so busy installing these 200 laptops, plus the ones that they got directly from this program, that they didn't have time to offer additional classes. So this table just sort of summarizes how the digital skills trainings was delivered for each of the different programs. And the yellow highlighting shows what the primary mode was of digital skills training. Oh, this I thought might be another place in case people wanted to look at this or ask questions about how it was done. Gone.
So Liz, the thing that I'll chime in and point out here is that while the overarching goals were the same, to increase literacy, get people devices, and get internet connectivity, The WDC was very intentional to let the communities deliver the services in the ways that would work best for their communities. And I think as a result, we saw gains in different ways across all of the organizations. And it allowed us also to pull out some of the special, unique ways that organizations were delivering services to be able to share that with others in our digital communities.
I'm really glad you said that. Thank you for pointing that out. So now we're moving on to the outcomes part. So again, the top bar is for people's responses in the pre-survey. The bottom bar is people's responses in the post-survey. And there's a little more than 100 people responding to these questions. So this figure shows you that participants were more comfortable in all of the computer tasks. But again, they have a ways to go before they're super very comfortable. And they're more comfortable in all of the internet tasks. People who were less fluent in English started with a lower self-rating for their skills, but they increased in parallel, except when it came to paying bills and banking, they had smaller gains. And I think that was probably because of the digital safety concerns. And there's still, a lot more that just about everybody I talked to said that they wanted to learn more. So let's summarize. So income is really important for technology access, and English proficiency was really important for having those digital skills. People are really hungry to learn technology. They see it as important for their success. Participants didn't want to learn from their children or from coworkers. Some were concerned that those sources might lack the skills or knowledge and the patience to teach them, and they just don't want to be a bother. Supported learning really works. People need help to learn technology, and the challenge is that they don't know how to find that help. What was the most effective training approach depended on the needs of the participants. In-language classes were really great for people who had stable schedules. In-language workshops were really great for people whose schedules were less stable. One-on-one intensive engagement was really great for people who had idiosyncratic knowledge and the group wasn't starting all at the same place. And self-study wasn't so effective for people who were just starting out or for people who didn't understand the language that the self-study was in, unless they had more support. With support, that worked out okay. People who speak a language other than English at home have farther to go, both in getting technology and in getting the skills to use it. But they also have fewer opportunities and less awareness of or access to those opportunities. Digital instruction just has to be in the language of the learner to be effective. But it is really helpful to include English terminology in the instruction for people who are going to transition into a more advanced class, which is probably going to be taught in English. So learning English vocabulary is really helpful. Many participants, especially people who are less fluent in English, just expressed a fear that they couldn't learn. And so instructors and participants alike importantly stress the value of culturally relevant, compassionate, and patient instruction with as much repetition as people need. And technology really provides critical access to people with disabilities, but the needs for this group may be different. So what were some of the ideas that came up? So some learners want to teach, and this could help ease the burden that I think is only growing with maybe a community-based volunteer corps. And again, with friendship, somebody from Friendship Circle, they had their more advanced youth teach some of the other kids. And what they said was this kind of experience teaching skills to other children builds confidence and is very empowering to our participants. And that probably would be true of other people as well. So written materials are needed to support independent learning for people who have to do independent learning, or for new or volunteer teachers. And it should be mostly visual if that's possible. Whatever isn't visual really needs to be translated into all of the languages. And I pulled out of the curricula, I got curricula from some of the participants. Oscar, you will recognize some of your curriculum here. So some of the things that seem important to include are just the basics of a computer, like what's the operating system, what's a mouse, then sort of how to interact with software and different types of software that people are going to need to use. I think it's really important to include digital safety. It was important to participants so that they're not so afraid. And just how to use the internet, including, in my opinion, how to evaluate information and translate pages, and then just how to continue learning. So finally, I think an inventory of available resources is needed, including how to access them. It became pretty clear that more participants would have a home computer if they knew how to find low-cost refurbished devices from a source that they could trust. I'm almost done. And once people understand the basics of computers, they probably can use other resources independently to learn more if they know where to find them. Okay, so that was it.
Wow, we did it.
We did it, I know.
2 minutes
2
before
minutes to
noon.
spare.
I know Oscar has a question, and I'm not sure that we might have time to completely answer that, but how do you think the new chat box will impact the learning process, considering that the students can converse with a chatbot and receive a very good quality indication? So that's a question, maybe food for thought there. In terms of, I think, our work, we're really taking into considerations, all of the recommendations. And I think thinking about how the WDC and our consortium partners really take, the valuable insights into, this evaluation to continue to strengthen, our model and continue to strengthen digital equity work here in Seattle King County. And we're looking forward to being able to implement, I think, these recommendations and really think about how you all can take this information and take it into your own communities, into your organizations to assess how we can continue to engage in this work, but really doing from a place where we're actually learning from people in the community and what they're sharing with us. So with that, we're going to make available this full report in the middle of June. We will also plan to make available the recordings of this presentation as well as the slides that you saw today from Liz. So with that, we want to thank you for your time. Feel free to email any of us for any questions. And Liz, I think what we're going to do is that we're going to also share your email address if people want to connect with you directly as well. But with that, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.